with a link to the recording, okay? And I encourage you to share it with your coworkers. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Bruce Miller. I'm with RimTech Consulting and also Catalyst IG Tools. And today's session is about the Achilles heel of modern EDRMS systems. This is one of two lethal threats to any modern EDRMS project. One of the threats is failure to reach 85% classification accuracy, but case records are 60% or more of all records. And if we don't have that properly deployed and under control and managed, then the software cannot apply disposition to them. So you would basically be losing control of 60% of your records, which is another complete failure. So this is a big deal, a very big deal. And I have to say that of all the EDRMS projects that I'm aware of worldwide, I would estimate that about 95% or more are failures. Why? Because of one or both of these two problems. And I deem this one, case records, to be the much, much bigger of the two. Okay? Um, it's a real problem. It's a problem with people, and it's a problem with software. So we'll cover that. But today, my goal is to show you what case records are, how to wrestle them to the ground, and how critical they are, and how to deploy them properly in an EDRMS. So my assumption today is that our repository will be SharePoint. For the records management software, it does not matter. This slide says Purview. You'll see other brands throughout other slides. We're vendor neutral here. I don't care what record software it is. Nothing in this presentation makes a difference. It doesn't matter what software you're doing. The issue is the same. The solution is the same. Okay. So what I need you to know in this slide is that if you're going to make your SharePoint records compliant, then that is going to completely dictate how you deploy SharePoint. If I take 10 people and say, can you deploy SharePoint? I'll get 10 different interpretations of what SharePoint should look like when it's operating. Well, that all goes away when you're trying to be records compliant. There's only one way to um, configure SharePoint, which is what we call the SharePoint IA or information architecture. So if you're using Purview, Gimmal, RecordPoint, um, uh, Collabware, it doesn't matter what you're using. It will force you to change how you deploy SharePoint. Okay. So let's get this out of the way right away. How do you know it's compliant? Your system is compliant, and how do you prove it? Well, I have an entire webinar and an entire training course on how to prove that it's compliant. And I encourage you to look at the webinar at the very least. But um, what, in my interpretation, what it means is that every document in SharePoint adheres to the retention schedule. It also means that all the documents are immutable, which means neither the document's content or its metadata can be altered by anybody. And it means that your event-based trigger dates are applied to your case records. Case records have event-based trigger dates, and they have to have proper application of those trigger dates applied to all of them. Only then can you do a disposition. And it's the disposition that is the true test of whether you have succeeded in your project. If you can do a disposition, you have a successful project. If you cannot, you have a failure. And I believe that the failure is not fixable. And you can see that in several of my webinars. I show how to measure it and how to and prove that you cannot fix it if it's broken. Okay. So you have to have a sufficient confidence that your system is over 85% accurately classified in order to do a disposition. Because, well, you'll see in a minute, I'm going to show you how the numbers add up to that. So there are three things that you have to bring together for an EDRMS: the retention schedule, your favorite record software, and SharePoint, okay? Three things, and they do not go well together. You're basically fitting two round pegs into one square hole called SharePoint, and that is a tricky business. Okay, so let's get right into the mathematical, technical definition of what are case records. Now, how many of your records are case records? Minimum 60. If you're a municipality or you're asset heavy or you're an insurance company, you're well over 80%, okay? This is the two things you got to know. Number one is that the software requires you to tell it and identify all the records that are case records. If not, they won't be able to deal with them properly. Number two is this is going to have a profound effect on how you deploy SharePoint. Profound, okay? Now, here's a look at a modern software-ready retention schedule. You'll notice over here, I'm just going to turn on my laser pointer here. There we go. So you'll notice each row is a category or record series or bucket, whatever you want to call it, in the retention schedule. But see this column here? Every category, you must declare explicitly whether it's a case or not. The software has to know because the software uses different algorithms for each category, whether it's case or not, right? So, as I said, the software has two modes of operation. It's going to calculate disposition in two different ways. If it's a case category that the record is coming from, then it's going to calculate event date plus X years, then delete or transfer, whatever comes at the end of the life cycle. If it's not case, then it's going to do this calculation. It'll say, how old is that record? It'll take today's date, subtract the age, and that comes up with, or sorry, it takes today's date, subtracts the date of the document, and the difference is the document's age. So if a PDF has date January 1st, 2010, it'll calculate that it's 16 years old. Then it compares that age, 16, with the retention period, 20, and if it's younger, it keeps it or skips over it. If it's older, then it marks it for final disposition, okay? So every single one of your categories or business activities in your retention schedule has to specify, am I a case or am I not? Or the software can't do its job. So what exactly are case records? They are records that are coming from or part of a case activity, because we all know that every category in the retention schedule is a business activity. So business activities about a person, place, event, or thing are case categories. So any record in there becomes a case record, okay? And what do persons, places, events, and things have in common? They all die. They all come to an end. So think of it this way. A case business activity is one which is a series of repeated adventures, and each adventure comes to an end, okay? For example, employees, the adventure is the employment of that employee. What's the termination? The termination date, that's the end date. So if you have 1,000 employees, 1,000 contracts, and 1,000 projects, then each contract is an adventure with an end date. Each employee is an adventure that terminates, and each project also has an end date. So that means that the retention rule, which always has three parts, a trigger, a retention period, and an action, the trigger for all case records is the same. It's end date, or what some of the 5 software products call event date. They both mean the same thing. It's the date the adventure ended. Here's an example. You do a health and safety audit in February. Takes 2 months. Well, that generates a set of records. And then no more audits until November. And then you do a financial audit about the financial statements. That's another adventure, another end date, and the records from the health and safety audit have nothing to do with the records of the second adventure in November. True? So all the records of each adventure form the case. That's what I'll refer to as a case. And the records in one case cannot be and must not be mixed up with the records of another case. Okay? So back to the audit example, the records from the health and safety audit in February form one pile of records. The case name might be called Health and Safety Audit 2026. And then the second audit is another case where the different end date, but the records might be called, or the case might be called financial audit 2026. Okay. So that's what case records are. And the intent, choose my words carefully because there are exceptions, but the intent of the record software is to destroy all the records in the case at the same time as a group. So with the case, in the event of union grievances, for instance, each union grievance is an adventure that comes to an end sooner or later, right? And you'll notice the retention tag is applied to the case, not to individual documents, okay? One important point to note is that the participants who are creating these records never know the event date. So you have to get these event dates from a third party, from another source, but not from the people using SharePoint and creating records day in and day out. That's not where event dates come from, okay? So that's it for case records. Now, what about non-case records, the other 40%? Well, we call those administrative records, and it's an ongoing business activity which cannot be broken into repeated adventures. Okay. So, like invoicing, for example, it really never stops. Invoicing happens every single day, no breaks. There's no adventure behind it. There's no end date at which all invoices stop. It's never going to happen, right? So the retention rule is very different. Retention rule says, how old is this document? And it compares it to the retention period. If it's younger, ignore. If it's older, mark it for disposition. So you'll see that in this case, operator rounds, the retention tag is applied to each document on a document level, whereas previously for case records, it's on a case level. Case level, document level. Okay. Now, here's where we lose, or I lose, maybe 50% of the people that I train on this. This is a little bit uncomfortable, but it's real. Let's pretend we have 1,000 contracts, which you probably do if you're 1,000 users. Then, then that means by definition that if someone presents a document to SharePoint about a contract, we have no mathematical choice but to force the user to pick from a list of 1,000 contracts in order to identify which contract this document is about. If we did not do that, that means we'd be doing this. We'd be walking up to SharePoint with a document or email about a contract, and we'd be saying, hey, everybody, I have a document about a contract, but it's a big secret, and I'm not going to tell you which contract it's about. That ain't going to work, right? So we have no choice. This is mathematical. Does it have anything to do with records? No. It's pure, simple math, which is anytime you present a document or record about a case, the user must be forced to specify which case. Which employee am I talking about? Which of the 1,000 projects is this about? Which of the 1,000 employees am I referring to? Is this document related to? So we have to do this. We have to present a list of 1,000 to the user. Now, the mechanism doesn't matter. The mechanism can vary. It can be a pop-up, flyout, a drop-down list. Whatever the heck it is, doesn't matter. But we have to do it. It must be done. So again, once more, if we have 1,000 projects, let me use contracts. If you have 1,000 contracts, then the user must be forced to tell us which of the 1,000 contracts this document is about. Otherwise, we don't know. It's anonymous, which makes no sense because we do have 1,000 contracts. They're all numbered or identified one way or the other. So here's where it kind of comes together here. We have a retention schedule with 253 categories in it, business activities. 253. 250 of them are not case categories. They're admin categories. 3 of them are case categories, contracts, employees, and projects. we have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects, which means we have 1,000 case or contract cases, 1,000 employee cases, and 1,000 project cases. Remember, we said earlier that every case must be kept separate from all other cases. Translation. In SharePoint, we have to have a different place to store them. So every document you put in SharePoint has to go to some place or location, right? Has to. So you're going to need to keep them separate if they're cases. So let's use some numbers here. Let's pretend we have 1,000 employees and we have 12 records per person per day, which is normal for an EDRMS. That means there's a flow of 12,000 records per day coming into the system. Whether they're being managed or not is another matter, but hopefully they all end up in SharePoint and become managed properly, right? 12,000. 60% of those 12,000 is 7,200. That means in an 8-hour period, 7,200 records are flying towards SharePoint. Where are they going to go? That's your job to figure that out. Well, if 7,200 of them will be about cases, that means they're either about a contract, an employee, or a project. There has to be 3,000 places for them to go because it could be about a contract. If so, which one? An employee. If so, which one? Right? So you've got to build 3,000 places in SharePoint. Now, that accounts for the case records. What about the 3,800 records that are not case records? They got to go somewhere too. Well, they're going to go into 250 different places. Okay. Now, underlying or underpinning this slide is the assumption that every business activity is a storage location in SharePoint. Let me repeat that. Every category in the retention schedule is a storage location or library in SharePoint. Okay. So let's say we have 800 categories, which would be normal for about 1,000 employees. Okay. 800. So out of that 800, 60% of them, or 480, will be subdivided into cases. Okay. So in this slide right here, we only have 3 cases. I'm sorry, that's a mistake. We only have 3 case categories: contracts, employees, and projects. But each of those 3 categories has 1,000 cases. So in total, in SharePoint here, we have to build 3,250 different places. Okay? And each of those 7,200 case records will end up in one of these 3,000 places. Okay? It also means that of those 3 case categories, contracts, employees, and projects, each of the 3 only has a single retention rule. Contracts, let's say contract end date plus 7 years and destroy, right? But there are 3,000 cases, and each case could have a different end date. So that means that you're going to need 3,000 event dates here. You have to store them because the software cannot work without them. It can't calculate the disposition of those case records without those 3,000 dates, right? So here in this approach, we're using a one-to-one-to-one model, which says that one category or business activity in the retention schedule equals one SharePoint library of the same name. And in that library in SharePoint is a content type of the same name. The content type contains the metadata unique to that library. So here we have safety, which is an admin category. Library is called safety, so is the content type. But contracts is a case category. Same thing, library is called contracts, content type called contracts, but in this library, we have 1,000 containers called document sets. And that's the mechanism we recommend you use in SharePoint for cases, okay? So in the retention schedule, we have 800 categories. Of those, 480 are on the right, divided into cases, 320 on the left, not divided into cases. And notice where the retention rules are being applied. Document level for admin activities and case level for case activities. So how does this come together in a SharePoint architecture? Well, this is how right here. We have a 3-layer cake, so to speak. The retention schedule with 320 non-case categories on the left, 480 on the right. In the middle, we're going to have a SharePoint architecture, and on the top, we need content rules. So let's walk up this cake here. Here's what the retention schedule looks like. Now, in SharePoint, second level up, each library is going to need metadata. So a healthy modern EDRMS has on average 14 metadata fields. Now, before you have a heart attack, the users only enter 2.1 on average. Okay? That's a very healthy ratio. Anyway, so now each library has a set of metadata that's unique to that library. By definition, each library's metadata must be different from the other 799, because if it was the same, then it would be describing the same business activity, right? So they're all unique. So there are 800 uniquely different libraries with different metadata. So this is what it looks like so far. We're 2 layers up, and we have the retention schedule at the bottom. We now have deployed our SharePoint with 800 libraries and 800 document sets, 800 content types, and X number of document sets, in this case 3,000, but you could have fleet vehicles, for example. You've got an activity called fleet vehicle maintenance. Well, that's fine. And how many vehicles in your fleet? I don't know, 100. Well, there's 100 cases. You have union collective bargaining. That's more cases. You have union grievances, more cases, investigations, more cases. So cases just grow like mad, okay? They're highly dynamic. But the libraries are not, right? You have union grievances, that's one library, but you have the actual grievances themselves are cases within that library. So now we get to the top of the pyramid. This is where most records professionals fail to understand what an EDRMS really is and what makes it tick. This is the most important slide of the day. If you take this one away, you've got your good money's worth out of this webinar. What most people think is that I have my retention schedule, typically, let's say 250 categories. Each category has a retention rule, but the retention rule is just math. It's a trigger, a period, and then an action. But there's not 250 uniquely different rules. You might have a rule that says keep 10 years and destroy on 25 of your activities. That's fine. So what you really got to realize is that of your retention schedule of 250 activities, you probably only have 50 mathematical permutations of retention rules. Retention rules are simple. You probably only have 50. At the most, you'll have 100, no matter how big you are, right? So that's easy. You can pump these retention rules into any of the 5 record software products in an afternoon. No big deal. But what most people fail to recognize is that that gets you nothing. Nothing. That's not going to help you at all. What you've got to do is you've got to create content rules to do something with those retention rules. Okay? Now, content rules are what I call the beating heart of a modern EDRMS. These are the 5 software products right here. They all require content rules. Okay? Of the 5 vendors, they all call these content rules something different. Microsoft Purview calls them auto-apply policies. RecordPoint calls them patterns. Doesn't matter what they call them. They're all the same. They all work the same. For example, we have a library called audits and 1,000 records in there. It's a busy audit, but only one final report. How do we identify the final report? Well, we'll need a piece of metadata. a column in SharePoint called Final Report. Default, no, but it could be yes. So we want to keep the final report longer than the other 999 documents. So what are we going to do? Very simple. We say if the final report equals yes, then apply the rule audits final report to that one document. And if we follow the table, audits final report is a retention rule that says end date of the audit plus 10 years, then destroy. So what a content rule does is it says, for this content in SharePoint, apply this retention rule from my pile of retention rules, my little tiny pile of 50 retention rules. And you keep going and going and going. We find that there's an average in a healthy EDRMS of about 3 content rules per library, per activity. So yes, you're going to end up with 2,400 of them. And that is right, that is normal, that is appropriate. Okay? So perfectly normal. But without these content rules, the software can do absolutely nothing. Okay? Just lost my way there for a second. Okay, so again, you've seen this before, but I just wanted to magnify it and show it in more detail. Every single category in your retention schedule must specify whether it's case or not. So the software knows which mode to work in. So in a modern software-ready retention schedule, you have to specify these content rules. So the content rule says, for this content, what is the condition that has to be met? To identify that content, you can have 1, 2, or even more conditions. And then which of those 50 retention rules are we going to apply to that content, right? So you have to do that and account for every record in all of your 800 or so libraries, okay? So let's look at some examples. This is Collabware, and notice they have a tab here called Content Rules, and it's very simple. SharePoint column department must equal to or contain the value administration, and then you apply a retention rule to that. This is Gimmal. On the left, these are your columns in SharePoint, the operator, and the value. And they have a nice little join where you can join multiple conditions together, right? Which only makes sense. And when you have the conditions specified, then you can assign a retention rule. This is Opus by AvePoint. And you'll notice here it says apply term by. What's a term? Term is a retention rule. That's what they call a retention rule. Define term criteria. Well, the criteria is what is the condition that must be met to specify the content I want. And it's between the if and the then. All of this is your condition. And when the condition's been met, apply the following term, which is one of your 50 retention rules, your 50 mathematically unique retention rules, right? So same pattern here. You can see column approved equals yes, or approved by matches Smith, and so on. You can have as few or as many conditions as you want, but it's got to specify this content in this place in SharePoint is what I want to use that rule for, okay? What about Microsoft Purview? Well, they call their content rules auto apply policies. And highly recommend, totally biased here, but highly recommend you watch either our short form or long form videos on YouTube of how to make auto apply policies work in SharePoint. So here it says apply label. What's a label? A label is, guess what? A retention rule, one of those 50 retention rules to content that contains specific words. No, we don't want that. Or properties. That's what we want. Okay. And here's the label right here. 10 years, then review it, then delete it. How do we specify the condition? Well, it's quite different for Purview. With Purview, we have to use a miniature programming language, whereas the other 4 products is just a form or a wizard you fill out on the screen. But here you have to get rather technical. Refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 0 equals reports. This is a library name, and this is the column name, okay? I have much training content on how to learn how to do that. In fact, I'm even thinking of having a course on just on KQL alone, because this is called Keyword Query Language, and you have to be good at that to write your auto-apply rules. So now let's take a look inside SharePoint. We have ourselves an activity called competitive procurement. And we know that when you put a document in, you have to force the user to pick which case. So procurement is a case activity. It has cases, and here they are. A bucket truck we bought, landscaping services, laptops, what have you. But each procurement is an adventure with an end date. So here we use a mechanism in SharePoint called document sets. Each document set represents a case or an adventure, and each of these document sets has to have an end date, which it does. So in SharePoint, a document set is the best mechanism to use to represent a case. Why? Because there's a secret or magical capability of these document sets where you can share a column. So a column can be either shared or non-shared. And I'll explain what that means in a minute, okay? But very powerful feature, very useful. So here's where we're going to learn about that. So here we have 3 cases. I'm going to explain this slide to you twice. The first time in records language and the second time in SharePoint language. Here we go. Records first. We have a category in the retention schedule called contracts. We have 3 contracts here. Lovely landscaping, safety, security, and tasty catering. We have 7 metadata fields. The first 5 are called case fields. They are filled in by the records manager or designate once only and only when the case is created. And the value you type into these fields are replicated across all documents in that case. Meanwhile, fields F6 and F7 we call document fields, and they're entered by the user, and the value in those fields is unique to that document. So here goes, same explanation in SharePoint language. We have one library called contracts. We have 3 document sets, one for lovely landscaping, one for safety security, one for tasty catering. We have 7 columns. The first 5 columns are shared columns. They are entered by the records or records delegate designate only when the document set is created, and the values they type into those columns is replicated automatically across all documents that flow into that document set. Columns F6 and F7 are entered by the user, and the values they type into those 2 fields are unique to that document. Okay, 2 different languages, exactly the same scenario. Okay, so to look at it from a 1,000-foot view, let's take a look at metadata for an audit, which is a case activity. We have 13 fields here. 9 of them are case fields. 4 of them are document level fields. These are filled in by the creator of the case, not the users. Users cannot touch these columns, whereas the user has to deal with these 4 down here. And look below, on the bottom of the slide, you'll see 7 content rules. And content rules are interesting. They specify what documents to apply what rule to. So let's take a look. If critical equals yes, retention equals permanent. That's interesting. That's a document level field. So any one document can be chosen by any user to become permanent. Now, if document type audit contains report draft, retention equals audit end date plus 15 years. So this is the document type right here. So if the user chooses report draft, it gets this retention rule. If they choose report final, it gets that retention rule. See how that works? So the point I want to make here is that the content type or the content rules, which the beating heart of an EDRMS, those content rules are using metadata fields to know what appropriate retention rules to apply. Okay. So that's how you handle case records in a modern EDRMS. So we've been doing this for years. So we've come up with some tools to automate the process and make it a lot faster and a lot easier. So just wanted to introduce you to that. We call it Catalyst. There are 3 components. There's a retention schedule with 2,200 categories in it. Each category has 14 metadata fields already ready to go. That constitutes a SharePoint IA out of the box, okay? It is literally out of the box for municipalities. For non-municipalities, not all 2,200 will be applicable, but many will. And the beauty of it is that what we do is we take that data and we deploy SharePoint automatically from it. So this is my bottom line right here. In order to deploy any EDRMS properly, no matter which of the 5 products you buy, you have to go through 6 steps. And you cannot change the sequencing either. First thing you have to do is to take your existing retention schedule, typically 250, and sadly you have to take a hammer to it and smash it to bits and generate a new one from it, which is machine readable by the record software you purchase, right? So you have to define it here, build it, and then you have to load it into the software you purchase. Now, we're not throwing away or smashing your retention rules. We're just smashing the configuration of it, right? The retention schedule looks, behaves differently. Why? Because you're building a retention schedule that no one will ever see or use. So let me repeat that. Your retention schedule will never be seen or used by humans. That is a proper retention schedule. That's what you're building here and loading it into your record software, which should take an afternoon. No big deal. Rewriting it is a big deal, but loading it in, easy. Now you need a SharePoint. That's where you need to define your 800 libraries, your 800 content types. And if you do come in at 14 metadata columns per library, you got to define 11,200 columns. That's a big deal. That could take you a year or 2, even 3. I've seen it take 4. Once you've got that done and it's a spreadsheet, then you need to go and hand it over to IT and say, excuse me, knock, knock, we have a little job for you. Would you mind building this in SharePoint for us, please? That's the blueprint for the SharePoint information architecture that your record software needs to operate properly. And yes, it includes all those libraries, all those cases, and all those event dates, right? Then, and only then, when that full SharePoint is up and running, can you do what you need to do to make the software work, which is build your 2,400 content rules. Why are you the last one in? Why do you have to wait so long? Because when you are in your record software creating the content rules, the software says, where's that library? Where's that metadata field? Make sure it's there. It's got to be there, right? And it'll test it and make sure it exists. So you have to finish steps 1 through 5 before you do step number 6. That's the last thing you got to do. How long will it take you to create those content rules? Well, we have here at RimTech, we have a rule of thumb. Non-Purview, 15 minutes each. Purview, 30 minutes each. That's the bad news. Now here's the good news. What we do with Catalyst is we eliminate step 5, completely eliminate it. That step could take you a year and cost hundreds of thousands easily. That step is deploying the SharePoint information architecture. So we do that basically overnight. And that's it. And that's all good. But what we are working on now and will be releasing later this year is we're going to also generate all of your 2,400 content rules automatically. Save you another year, perhaps. So bottom line is in order to manage case records properly, you must architect it right. You must manage case records properly or you will die. The system will not work. Somebody please quote me on that. Okay. You've got to have the proper SharePoint architecture, which means every library must be configured as a case or not. The SharePoint has to be static. If you are creating libraries and sites and columns every day of the week, that's not a governable SharePoint. It is just simply not. And number 4 is please, you've got to create content rules, and those your software can't work without them. That's the heart of the system. You have to write them. So be prepared to write them. Set aside the time. Okay. And one last point, which I didn't put on the slide, but I should have, is that if you're going to use Purview, the level of effort will go up substantially. And Purview has kind of 2 ways it works. It works out of the box the way they recommend, and yes, it does work. And or you can bypass that and do it differently. I strongly urge every buyer of Purview not to go by the book. It's way better to use it in a better way. And you can watch one of our YouTube videos to find out how to do that. So that's it. If anybody have any questions, you can either open your mic or I invite you to put a question in the chat. If there's anything I can answer.
Yes, I have a question for you. It's Mano.
Yeah. Hi.
In your last slide, the deployment of this last slide, the number 5, you said to create the other one, yeah, the number 5 without that system. That is for IT to do and not the IM records?
Yes. Yes. Then step number 4 is writing the blueprint. Step number 4 says, here's the libraries I need, here's the metadata I need, and here are the case structures that I need. All that can be put into a spreadsheet. And then you hand the spreadsheet over to IT and say, here, go build it, right? And
Okay.
that build process, imagine how long it would take an IT department to say, okay, I got to create 800 libraries, 11,200 columns, content types, everything, and it all has to be perfectly exactly like in that spreadsheet. That could easily take you minimum 6 months, minimum. Even if you went flat out, it would take at least that. We've done it manually before, and it's taken a year. So, and my model here assumes you're just 1,000 users. If you're like, we have a client with 7,600 users, there's no way that's going to be done in 6 months, right? We've estimated 5 years to build it. But we found that we can do it with Catalyst with an automated process overnight. So that's what we do. We take the spreadsheet and build it.
Because I was under the impression in SharePoint that that part was done by the record people. And number 6, that when is IT gets involved.
No, Manan, it's the exact opposite. Exact opposite.
Okay.
Do you want to become a SharePoint expert? Do you want your salary shouldn't have to depend on how well you know SharePoint, true? Right?
Yeah,
It shouldn't.
right. Yes.
So you don't want to have anything to do with number 5. I definitely don't advise you to.
Okay.
But number 6, it's the reverse. Number 6, an IT person is going to say, what's the content rule? I don't care what these things are. What do I? It's all records. It's the content rules say for this content, this is how long we're going to keep it, and this is what we're going to do with it. That's your job, not IT. Another way to put it is the content rules are saying what you're doing with the software. True? Right? How are we going to put Purview or Collabware to work? That's your job, right? And this is what records managers miss. They think that all they have to do is step number 3, which is load my retention rules in. Okay, they're in there. Now what? Crickets. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The software will do nothing for you, right? Without these content rules.
Okay, makes more, it's starting to make sense there. Thank
That's
you.
good to hear. That's good to hear. Are there any other questions?
Hey Bruce, it's Donna. So I frequently find that most case files are just lacking completely
Oh,
in
yes.
any retention schedule at all. So for
Yeah.
some people this will be very revolutionary, and you've talked about this in your sessions before. You're very good at this because this is where people have none at all. So I actually have never paid attention to just the column, yes, no, and I might switch that over, but I've been working with a lot of users to just even explain the concept because
Oh,
even though I would say that they're skilled at knowing that there is a retention schedule, this is a huge gap, and especially in
oh
public
yeah.
sector, where we just don't really do a good job of this to begin with. And then no wonder that the systems are failing because we have
Yes,
done nothing.
that's right. That's right. Buying the software is one thing. Loading in your retention schedule is another, but you haven't accomplished anything. And you know what? The software cannot do anything without these content rules, and the content rules cannot do anything without the proper SharePoint information architecture. So it's a multi-layer system, right? You've got to layer the IA on top of the retention schedule and then layer the content rules on top of that, or it won't work. It cannot work, right? Here's what I believe is happening. Sad to say, sad to say. What I think is happening is mostly with Purview, but people are buying Purview, putting it in place, and they're just putting in their 50 retention rules and letting any user apply whatever rule they want to any document they want for any reason they want. That's easy to deploy, but it's a certain failure for two reasons. Number one is since when is it compliant to let users decide what they want? Really, right? That's just not ever going to reach true compliance. You're never going to hit your 85% accuracy. And number two is what the heck is a case record? No one has ever heard of one. Most records people don't even know what they are and how to deal with them. So if you just turn it loose like that on users and depend on users to apply retention, they don't know a case, nor should they. No idea, right? But if it's built properly and they go to put a document in a library called audits, they're going to be faced with a list of audits. Which audit are you going to put this document into? So they put it in the right one. Everything's fine. In the background, retention rules applied properly, right? So that's what I think is happening out there. I once made a phone call to one of these five vendors. I won't name which one. They were in Europe. I was working on a project for the United Nations at the time. And I said, "You're selling this software." And he was new to it. He had no clue really about how the software worked. And I said, "You've got, I can't be the only customer that was bugging you about this." He said, "Yeah, you are." So I said, "Well, how many clients do you have?" He said, "Well, I have three that I'm responsible for." He was tech support, right? I said, "Well, how many rules do your customers have?" He said, "Three." Right? Like, really? Okay, so was that, I think I saw a question, yeah, in the chat there. Let me check. According to Purview, documentation with event-based retention, we should be creating an event for each case record. This does not seem very efficient. Oh my goodness. Good observation. Todd, you're right. It's not very efficient. That's why we recommend not doing it. There's a full, um, there are uh, two YouTube videos that tell the full story. One is called "Disposition is Broken in Purview." Uh, Here's how to avoid it. You need to watch that. And the second one is how to deal with event-based retention, and that's coming up in about 2 weeks. This is a schedule. You can sign up for it now. But you need to view both of these. But the way it works briefly is this, is you have to create an event type, and your 3,000 dates are going to be stored in Purview, which disassociates the dates from the data or records in SharePoint, right? And so what we advocate is don't do that. Store the event dates in SharePoint where they belong as a case record or as a case metadata field in the document sets. Okay, so you have 1,000 sets of records in SharePoint. That's where the date belongs, not in Purview. Does the Purview method work? Yes, but it is brutal. Not only that, but the Purview has no concept of a case. So what Purview does is it insists that you use a field called asset ID, and you have to go into every document in a case and make sure that it has that asset ID for every document. And that is the case, according to Purview, right? Holy schmoly. You know, my best advice, don't do what they advise. There's a much better way to do it. But stay tuned. Just look at the other YouTube videos for that. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm going to be hanging around for a little while.
Yeah, one more, Bruce. It relates to the retention rules.
Yeah.
You mentioned about only 50. I've worked in environments where they've actually tried to kind of simplify down to 10, and they just, oh, we want to simplify down to 10. And it really shouldn't matter, should it? Because if it's a computer, we can just get, if we want to have 200, it's a complicated, but it really doesn't matter to simplify your retention rules down to some tiny number, does it? Like to get
No,
your, no,
no,
okay.
the day of the big bucket has come and gone. I wrote a paper on why big buckets are a great idea 25 years ago. And now, if you look at my YouTube videos, I have a YouTube video called, and I love this quote, "The death of the big bucket." Right? There's no need of them anymore. We can get as granular as we want. What the message I want to get out to every records professional on earth is this, is that if you're going to manage electronic records, it's not about retention rules. It's about content rules. That's the beating heart of your EDRMS. That's what you have to learn, understand, and deploy. And you'll quickly learn that you can't have content rules without a SharePoint IA. And the SharePoint IA has to match your retention schedule, which it doesn't today, right? So to me, what is the answer to the correct number of buckets or activities, which is a different question than the number of retention rules? I think 50 to 100 is plenty, no matter how big you are. For retention rules, that's not the true story. The true story is how many business activities do we have? We have a rule of thumb here at RimTech, which says that any modern retention schedule has less than 1/3 of the business activities accounted for. And we've proven that so many times with every one of our clients. So what is the right number of business activities? It's a simple answer. It's the number of business activities that actually exist in the business. So in the business, people are doing these activities, whether you're aware of them or not, whether they exist in the retention schedule or not. And they're going to put them in SharePoint, whether you're there or not. So the business activities nowadays drives the number of buckets in the retention schedule. They have to, because the documents are going in SharePoint with or without the retention schedule, right? This is my test that I put records managers to when I'm trying to convince them that the retention schedule is inadequate. I say, show me your retention schedule. Thank you. Are you looking at a laptop? Yes, I am. Okay. How long have you had it? 3 years. Oh, well, aren't you going to get it replaced? Yes. So that means that everyone in your organization is going to have a new laptop in every 3 or 4 years. Well, of course. Show me where that activity, which has cost millions of dollars, show me where that business activity is in your retention schedule. I haven't had a single client come up with it yet. We call it laptop refresh program. It's a case because every 3 or 4 years, You replace all the laptops. It's a huge endeavor, right? So why don't you have it in your retention schedule? So, well, I'm working for one municipality in British Columbia right now, and they presented with 250, typical 250 activities, and we're now at 900. Another regional level of government with 4,600 employees presented to us 4 years ago with 220. I don't know where that number comes from, but seems to always be around 220. Anyway, 220. 3.5 years later, 1,800, right? So, yeah, 2 points of failure, not enough business activities, and who cares how many retention rules there are? It doesn't matter. What matters is how many business activities, right? Wow, that was a very long-winded answer. Sorry about that. Case records are my kryptonite. It absolutely, I- you know, it makes or breaks every single EDRMS project out there. Usually breaks. So let's not let that happen to you, okay? Any other questions? Very good. Well, thank you for taking some of your time on a Friday afternoon to spend with me. I really appreciate it. And tomorrow you'll get an email from me with the recording. And again, I really, truly appreciate it.